will the Steam machine succeed? Which I think is such a funny question when you look at all of the information that we have, at least we have, Aaron, and we will share with all of you, our wonderful guests, because success is such a like arbitrary term.
Oh, yeah.
Because, so what is the number for the number of Steam Decks that sold? I believe I said it was 4 million.
Yeah, it's about 4 million.
This February of this year, so February of 2025, there was an estimated 4 million sales of the Steam Deck. For context, there is a chart that we found in the Linus Tech Tip video. Aaron, how many millions of copies of a PlayStation 2 were sold, which I believe is the highest selling console of all time?
Yes, correct. The answer is about 160 million.
What about the Nintendo Switch?
Nintendo Switch just shy of 160 million in the 154 range.
My point with all of this is that I don't think Valve is going to plan on hitting those kind of sales numbers. Obviously, that would be a crazy amount of success. But if Valve thinks that 4 million units of the Steam Deck being sold as of 2025 is successful, I think they're going to be completely fine with sales with the Steam machine. Another important point from that chart is that the Wii U, which is a like massive failure of a console, sold 13.6 million units. I think they're going to do just fine.
Yeah,
like
the fucking Vita, which is a punchline for having sold 5 units in America, sold 12 million. Like, yeah, they're going to be comfortable with success on the scale of the Steam Deck in the 4 to 5 million range in its first handful of years. I think that because of the way that they're not subsidizing the console as well, all of the units sold, they're not necessarily relying on recurring revenue from other sources so much as they are just making money on every unit sold. So that's a net win. And then you have to also factor in, and this is just my opinion, that the Steam Deck, even if it only sold 4 million units, was a brilliant proof of concept for SteamOS. It got SteamOS into people's hands, proved that SteamOS was capable of running games, running them well, and was just an appealing operating system to begin with, so much so that other competitors started implementing SteamOS onto their hardware once those started releasing, meaning that as the larger hardware ecosystem grew outside of Valve-manufactured hardware, they're still winning on the software side. So even if they only sell 5 million units in their lifetime, if the machine itself is successful enough to draw industry attention, other PC manufacturers may try to do similar things, much like with the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go and those sorts of machines. If SteamOS becomes the go-to operating system for console-like PC play, that's more profitable to Valve than selling 160 million units of this thing. At that point, the hardware sales are largely immaterial because they continue to own the software side and, more importantly, the sales ecosystem by driving everybody through Steam.
I think another big positive of this, and it is kind of funny because obviously Steam has a few things that people can game on now hardware-wise, or will have a few things with the Steam Deck and all the different versions of the Steam Deck. And, well, I guess the different versions of the Steam Deck, it's actually the same specs. I think it's just, do I have an OLED screen or do I not? Or do I have, more or less storage? But regardless, I do think it's a good thing for developers for there to be kind of a baseline PC target with the Steam machine. One of the big negatives that Microsoft has run into with having the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S is that people have to target 2 separate build targets for 2 very differently powered machines. And generally speaking, developers do not like that. For those that don't know, one of the biggest reasons that there are optimization issues with a lot of PC games, especially on ports from console games, is that there are so many different iterations of what someone's computer can look like because so many computers are custom and there are so many different manufacturers. It's incredibly difficult to test for every single use case. Not just that, but you also have to determine what is the oldest like build that you want to be supporting. And when I say build, I mean like components from a PC, right? This is a really big thing with mobile games where they're like, okay, what is the oldest version of an Apple phone that we're going to be willing to support? Because the older the version you want to support is, the more you have to optimize or potentially cut certain ideas because you can't run it on old hardware. So having a more standardized PC build to focus on, I don't think that's a bad thing for developers if the Steam machine really picks up momentum. I think that's super cool. Hopefully it leads to some, solid performance from games. But the short of it is, Aaron and I don't think this thing needs to sell a ton of units in order to be considered a success by Valve. I think that's why they're not subsidizing this thing. They're trying to just make it a stable revenue stream regardless of how many of them that they sell.
Gaben needs another yacht.
Yeah, with a submarine compartment or something crazy. I don't know. I will say, I think it's wild that... and of course, as I say, I think it's wild. I think I was really distracted by the yacht comment.
If you guys if you're listening to this and you're not aware of Gaben's new yacht, search Gabe Newell yacht and just look at this fucking thing. It's a behemoth.
Gabe is such an interesting human, and I mean that mostly in a loving way. We were going through this process. I found some footage of him delivering Steam Decks to people's homes as part of like a PR thing. And it was just very strange because Gabe kind of looks like Santa Claus in a way. I don't know. It was a interesting vibe.
He does have Santacular vibes. I will say.
Santacular vibes.
Yeah, that's the word I'm going with.
I remember what I was going to say. It was that with the unit sales, I think this is a good transition into the headwinds that they're going to face to success, which there are a few. One of them being that they do not have a robust distribution strategy for the Steam machine. Part of that is probably to help keep the cost down because they don't want to have to share any of the margin with resellers, which would put a markup on whatever they're trying to sell a device for. The negative of that is, they do not have the same scale as PlayStation, Microsoft, Nintendo when it comes to distribution. These will not be in Target. They will not be in Walmart. They won't be at other distributors.
They won't be on Amazon.
They won't be on Amazon. You will have to buy them directly from Valve. And Valve just has limited distribution and production capabilities when compared to pretty much everyone else that's making stuff.
I mean, if the demand for this thing right out of the gate was as high as it was for the PS5 when the PS5 launched and there was that crazy chip shortage and, there was a minor illness spreading around a handful of select countries, if that level of demand was there for the Steam machine on day one, I have a feeling that the PS5 shortage would look like a bountiful table filled with all of the finest meats and cheeses in comparison. Because of that, limited distribution and manufacturing capability. And I think the fact that they're going that route with it alone means that they're just not planning on it being that big of a release. Not to say that they can't, amp it up as time goes, but there will always be a bottleneck when the only place something is available is the OEM website. Except for the aftermarket, of course, and that's always going to be a thing. But like that's secondary market stuff, not relevant to Valve's bottom line at launch.
Well, I think we can pretty comfortably say this is not my idea. I brought this up to Aaron. This is from the Linus Tech Tip video. Linus talks about the fact that he doesn't even think Steam expects to sell 10 million copies of this thing quickly because they're not doing a custom system on chip deal with AMD. The reason he's kind of thinking through this process in that way is that part of the reason Xbox stopped their handheld production or like R&D investment was because AMD needed them to commit to a minimum of 10 million units sold to justify them working on a custom chip for their hardware. And so Linus's thought is, well, Steam would probably end up getting a better form factor and like better performance if they did a custom SoC, but they're not doing that. So it probably means that they aren't thinking they're going to sell enough units quickly enough to justify doing some of these custom components. So that was kind of an interesting thing to find out. All of this to say, they don't have the means to distribute these things in mass to the same degree as other people. And I think that's fine because it's a private company. And I think their idea of success is a little bit different. Talking about the headwinds, though, Aaron, one that you brought up to me before I read it in an article were some of the interesting things when it comes to kernel-level anti-cheat. If you want to elaborate on some of that.
Yes, I would be happy to. This was going to be my next major point in terms of in essence, the question is, is the framing of the Steam machine as a console killer inaccurate, or just sort of like maybe naively, maybe just naive a little bit. And one of the reasons that I believe it is, naively optimistic is the issues that Valve with their SteamOS and everything, and Linux in general, still have with kernel-level anti-cheat, which is a system that is implemented into many, 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 many popular games, designed to obviously stop cheating from becoming a huge rampant issue that can completely demolish a game's community, economy, and just erode the player base to the point where it's non-existent. You see kernel-level anti-cheat installed on many games like Call of Duty, Battlefield, basically anything, massive multiplayer games, and various, I think Fortnite possibly also has kernel-level anti-cheat. And that means at a very foundational level, the games basically just don't run on Linux, because Linux and kernel-level anti-cheat don't like to play nice together, which means that in terms of trying to push the Steam machine as a console killer, you are now relying on people being willing to take the box, bring it home, partition the drive, and throw Windows onto half of it just to be able to play Call of Duty, which is a system seller. Call of Duty is routinely the highest selling game in any given year, even when they release some dog shit, apparently, like Black Ops 7. People are still buying these games en masse, right? And they are not going to move to a system that does not allow them to play their sports games, that does not allow them to play their Call of Duties and their Fortnites, because those are the games that they play. Those are the reasons they own a PS5. I have met so many people who only own a PS5 so that they can play Call of Duty. And to not be able to play Call of Duty on this box means that it is not even remotely designed to achieve the same level of mass market appeal as a Call of Duty machine, essentially, right? Not to say that Call of Duty and PC gaming don't have, like, their extremely deep ties, but on a foundational level with this, out of the box, to get the appeal of that console-like it just works element, this isn't a PC, it is a Linux machine. It's not going to run Windows originally. That will require extra legwork and technical know-how from the purchaser that the general console market does not have any interest in learning or implementing. So, yeah, the kernel-level anti-cheat Linux stuff is going to end up being a huge barrier that at all levels will stop the Steam machine or a Steam Deck or anything like this from completely overtaking the market, just because it foundationally doesn't work with some of the most popular games out there. And I think that, of course, then ties back into a lot of the stuff we've been talking about with how do we distribute this thing? Because I think if Valve had an argument that they had cracked PC power in a console form factor and ease of use combo, they might have had a different strategy to just completely blow the market up, right? They probably would be selling on Amazon. They probably would be selling in Target and Walmart and Best Buy. But they know that their addressable market is limited in no small part by that Linux element. So I think that is a worthwhile point to bring up.
Yeah, I'd say that when this thing comes out, I'd feel pretty confident that it's going to be a thing where we know someone with a Steam machine, similar to how we know someone that has a Steam, or a lot of people know someone that has a Steam Deck. Like, I think this thing will be popular enough that you will see it around, and it may pull people in when they see how much people like it. Like, the people that buy this thing, I think, are going to like it a lot, and there probably is going to be a lot of people that, you know, there probably are going to be, probably are going to be a lot of people that see someone else enjoy this thing so much, and they're like, you know what? I think I'm going to get one of those too, because, you know, of all the convenience that it provides when it comes to PC gaming. And just like the portability, I just don't think we can fully understand until it comes out the benefit of how everything just working and like ease of use is, because so much of what's a pain with PC is like worrying about whether your parts work together or whether it's gonna break randomly because your RAM is corrupted because it's all from a different vendor. Like, there's so many things that are just easier buying a pre-built machine, and it looks like this will be one of the best space efficient pre-built machines that will be on the market for that price point, certainly. I would also just say, with the Fortnite, COD, all these big games that are like big system sellers that need the anti-cheat, that might stop mattering so much, because we are getting closer and closer to a world where the bigger and bigger releases are ones that have nothing to do with games as a service. So as an example, there was Schedule 1 earlier this year, Peak came out this year, there was Blueprints this year, there was Dispatch this year, which we just talked about. I'm listing off all these games because these are all, I actually don't know if Dispatch was a PC exclusive, but a lot of these were PC exclusive games that sold gangbusters and are driving the games industry. AAA is becoming increasingly more kind of in its own little segment of the industry, where most AAA games suck and people don't really respect AAA in the way that they used to when Aaron and I were growing up. And I think the more that happens, the better the Steam Deck looks, because a lot of these games that are indies are coming out first on PC, and they may never come to console because there's a long process trying to become certified on a platform. Yeah. And until you become this like mega hit, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, they don't give a shit. They have departments that do focus on indie games, but it's not until you start showing them that you can make money that they start caring about helping you port something. Yeah. That's the reality for the vast majority of creators. You're going to get way more solid day one content, I think, on the Steam Deck than a lot of consoles in the coming years, just based on what we've been seeing.
No, I actually completely agree with you, with one minor asterisk. If you look at the nature of exclusive titles across platforms, obviously Xbox has thrown the concept out entirely. Sony is releasing more and more of their games on PC, specifically on Steam, just to broaden their market. But
which don't need anti-cheat. I just want to mention, do not need anti-cheat, so you can play all your God of War, etc. Anyway, sorry.
Yes, fair. But a lot of them may still require PSN access in a lot of cases, which does limit like global reach depending on the title. But the reality is that the PC gaming market has the most exclusives, and it's not even close. Because so many of those indie games, those smash hit indie games, do come out exclusively on PC because it's a lower barrier to entry for the developers, which means that you have this thriving indie scene where games from completely unknowns can come out and sell a gajillion copies and become enormous, sensational success stories that people resonate with and want to play. And I think that there is a huge market for that, especially when you throw back in those PlayStation exclusives in games like Clair Obscur and other, various different cross-platform hits, right? Like, I don't think you can reasonably make the argument that the value proposition of moving to PC gaming is terrible on a games basis, right? The games are absolutely there. And the price point for them is often better than it would be on any other console because of Steam sales. And then you factor in the free online component for the games that do work with online, which is most of them. So yeah, 100%. There's a great market there, and the rise of AA and indie games in every space is definitely a huge benefit to PC and PC to it. The only caveat there being that the markets, like the market segment of people who buy a PlayStation just so that they can play the newest Call of Duty and FIFA games, are not the same people who will have even heard of Blueprints. They're two different worlds of audience. It's the difference between trying to describe Begonia and Fantastic Four, right? The target audiences are going to be fairly distinct between those two things. And the people who want a machine that plays Call of Duty just want a machine that plays Call of Duty. They're really not going to be considering the ecosystem of, slipping AAA quality, rising AAA costs, lack of innovation across the board. Fortnite still makes a ton of money. Call of Duty still makes a ton of money. And the audiences for those games are so entrenched in the world of those games that any machine that can't play those games is just not going to be something they want to buy. That's just my opinion on it. But I think for everybody else, I think the Steam Deck kicks ass. I love that thing. It has been my portal back into PC gaming since my PC is out of date and I'm far too broke to afford to build a new one at the moment. But the thing just works. It has its quirks, but by and large, the machine is reliable. It's performant. It keeps up with most everything that I've thrown at it. And the form factor is great. And I can't complain about much of anything to do with the Steam Deck. So in some ways, the Steam machine is for me. And I do think that people's relationship with the machine will be very similar to that of the Steam Deck, where there will be a great many enthusiasts all sort of sharing their love for it, but it won't be something where everyone has one. I think you're completely spot on with that. But, the big takeaway for me, though, is that the Steam machine does not have to be a console killer. It doesn't have to ship 10 million or even 8, 7, 6 million units for it to be considered a success by Valve. And arguably, the industry at large, depending on what moves the other hardware manufacturers make in response to the success or, failure of the Steam machine.
Yeah, I mean, I think in closing for me, one, I think you bring up a good point. The Steam machine may honestly be a great transition point for people that have the Steam Deck because it will be more performant in general. It won't have the battery life issues. It will expand upon presumably the Steam library that maybe you start to build if you start gaming on a Steam Deck. So I think that's actually a really good point of it's kind of like the next natural upgrade to expanding on people that like the Steam Deck and see the benefit of it and then PC gaming as a whole. So good call out with that. I hadn't actually thought through that one. Outside of that, I would just like to say, I think this will be successful from Valve's perspective. Will it sell over 10 million units in the first 4 years? Maybe not even, but I think it's going to achieve the goals that Valve want it to, and I think it positions them to, at some point, potentially make an even more compelling, perhaps console-focused offering in the future. The other thing to keep in mind, too, is hopefully once AI calms down and a lot of the hardware associated with consoles and PCs starts to cool, this thing could get quite a bit cheaper. Maybe even to the $600 range. And if it can get to the $600 range and Valve is willing to sell it at that and they're still making a profit, that becomes a much more competitive offering even against normal consoles. So,
oh god, yeah.
I do think I think Xbox certainly needs to pay attention. There's a real threat to Windows in the gaming space from Steam. Nintendo is doing its own thing as always and is immune to everything.
Yes.
And PlayStation, it'll be interesting to see what PlayStation does. I will say, if they stop making exclusives go to PC, I think that shows us that PlayStation is at least somewhat concerned about Steam and their ability to steal business in the future.
Yeah.
We will see what happens there.
Yeah, completely agree. The people who should be on the closest lookout right now are people at Microsoft, candidly. Just because, again, their operating system is being threatened for dominance in the gaming space. For the longest time, Linux gaming was very fringe. It wasn't necessarily mocked or derided on the same level as like Apple gaming, but it certainly wasn't, at the forefront of PC culture. And right now, PC gaming culture is awash with news about Linux just because it is becoming so good for that purpose. So Windows, both in terms of them completely hucking their console identity out the window and losing traction with players on the basis of the strength of SteamOS, they need to be concerned on multiple fronts. Whatever box they release next, especially if it is something closer to a PC console hybrid, it now needs to compete directly with the Steam Deck, and they will have distribution on their side and branding on their side, but they might not have performance on their side. And if they don't have access to a Steam library on their hardware, they will lose out on the PC market for that PC console hybrid. So yeah, they have to keep a close eye on what they're doing. Nintendo doesn't need to give a shit. And right now, PlayStation is basically the only console in the console war. It's a high-end machine that does what it needs to do. But the biggest concern for them will be software sales. How much do they need to be concerned about Steam as a storefront competitor? But also, if the Steam Deck does find a foothold in the market, it will be interesting to see how hardware expectations change among mainstream gamers. Because that will be when Sony starts to take notice, right? If console sales take a $5 million chip out of, not $5 million, sorry, a 5 million unit chip out of Sony's, ambitions, they'll notice that, but not necessarily care if it's not playing to the same core audience. But if it balloons in popularity, if the prices go down and the sales go up, then yeah, it could end up being long-term very disruptive. In the short term, I have a feeling that it's mostly a curio that will appeal to a core audience that has every potential to grow. But yeah, we're not going to be seeing any dethronings or anything like that in the near future. I sincerely doubt. I think the console market, insofar as anyone can claim it is currently stable, will remain largely stable after the launch of the Steam machine. But it'll be very interesting to see where this thing goes, because it seems like a much better direction than the original Steam machines back in like the 2010s and whatnot. This seems like a much better thought out system with a much better OS to back it up. So yeah, it could be the start of something big.